Hey, so I know that having good, confident conversations in English is a sticking point or difficult point for many of you and many English learners, regardless of their level. Many times people are very focused on the words and what exactly they want to say, and they kind of overlook or forget about the elements of communication that go into a successful conversation. A lot of times we learn to talk about specific common topics like our hobbies, our family, our culture, our hometown, our job, and we kind of just get stuck there. And conversations that go beyond these topics are often very, very difficult. So in today's lesson, we are looking at 10 things that will help you to have more confident, more natural, and deeper conversations in English. Okay, the very first thing, you need to expand the range of topics that you know how to talk about. So if you have studied English in school or in a group class, chances are you have practiced having conversations about common topics like your hobbies, your family, your country, your hometown, where you're from, maybe food and things like that. And while these topics are important, they are necessary, you have to be able to talk about these very common things. The challenge comes in when you are in a new situation with new people talking about a new topic. It's then that you realize, okay, I actually don't know how to carry a conversation on this topic. So learning how to talk about a wider range of topics is really going to help improve your overall conversation skills. So start to pay attention to what people around you are talking about. What are your colleagues talking about? What are your friends talking about? What are your family members talking about? What are people talking about online, on social media, and so on? And if you are not familiar with these topics or with current events, you can always just look these things up online. You can watch videos, you can read blogs, you can listen to podcasts, and this is great listening and reading practice for you anyways. And of course, you're gonna learn a lot of new vocabulary. So I do have full lessons on how to learn to talk about new topics. You can check those out as well. So the first thing, make sure you are expanding the range of topics that you know how to talk about in English, because chances are you already know how to talk about these topics in your own language, but you've just not had the practice doing so in English. All right, the next tip is to go into conversations prepared whenever possible, of course, all right? So if you know that you have a discussion or a meeting or an interview or even just a chat with friends coming up, you can prepare ahead of time by thinking about questions that you might be asked, thinking about questions that you might have to ask, thinking about the topics that you might discuss, and anticipating how the conversation might go. So I'm not saying that you have to sit down and write your whole conversation ahead of time, absolutely not, but just doing a quick brainstorm and sort of asking yourself, okay, what topics are probably gonna come up? What are we probably going to have to talk about? What questions might I need to ask, and what questions might other people ask me, and how can I maybe answer those questions confidently? So this little bit of preparation ahead of your English conversations will go a long way. Whenever you are prepared, you are much more confident. So when you go into a conversation blindly and you haven't thought about it ahead of time, it shows. And when you get nervous and you lose your confidence, it's really hard to kind of get it back in the middle of a conversation. So whenever possible, be prepared ahead of time for your conversations, your discussions, or your meetings in English. The next thing that will help you to have better conversations, always consider the other person's perspective or the other person's opinion or point of view. A lot of times we're so focused on our own points and getting our own message across and making sure we have the right words, and we're focused on how we sound, that we don't really think about the other person's perspective or the other person in general. Now, the benefit of considering the other person's opinion, this is going to help you to choose the right tone, which is a big part of English communication. It's going to help you decide how formal or informal to be, how detailed or how general to be, how diplomatic or direct to be, and all of these things are very, very important when it comes to communication. So make sure you always consider the other person's perspective. Okay, so the next thing is to train yourself to look at topics from different perspectives, from points of view that are different from your own. Now, how is this going to help you with your English conversations? The ability to look at things from different perspectives and consider all sides before forming an opinion or expressing an opinion is actually called critical thinking. And critical thinking helps you to better understand yourself, your logic, your thought process, and to better understand other people. And if you can understand your own thoughts, then you can better express or communicate your own thoughts. Now, learning to look at topics from different perspectives will help you in lots of different situations. For example, in discussions, in debates, if you are writing an essay for an exam like the IELTS exam, it's helpful when you want to defend someone else's opinion, if you need to convince someone or persuade someone of your opinion or the points that you're trying to make. Thinking this way is very helpful if you talk about topics like politics or religion or any topic that people might find a little bit controversial. Being able to look at topics from different perspectives is also going to help you be more diplomatic and empathetic in your conversations. Now, all of these points, all of these things are important because they're all a part of the culture that goes along with communicating in English. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you have to change your opinion or change your perspective. Absolutely not. You are entitled to have your beliefs, to have your opinions, to have your perspectives, but it is important to try to think about and consider the perspective of someone else who doesn't think the same way as you. That will make for a more interesting conversation or discussion. And here's an exercise that you can use to do this. It is challenging, but it's a very, very useful skill to have. So you can look up different debate topics online and brainstorm ideas arguing for and against these topics. So literally go onto Google and search for debate topics, all right? Debate topics, and then make point form notes arguing for this topic and against this topic. It's challenging, but it's really, really helpful. Okay, the next thing, find a nice natural rhythm in a conversation. Do not go too fast. Do not go too slow. So how do you know what's too fast? How do you know what's too slow? It can be a little bit tough sometimes to figure that out, but a general rule of thumb is to pay attention to the pace that the other person is speaking and try to kind of match a similar pace, all right? So for example, if they ask you one question and you respond, and then you ask them 10 questions in a row, this is not a natural rhythm, this is not a natural flow, and the conversation feels more like an interview or an interrogation, okay? And that's not what you want, because you don't want to overpower the other person, of course. And at the same time, you don't want to kind of get lost and have the other person overpower you. So finding this natural flow or natural rhythm is very helpful because it establishes a nice rapport and trust and level of comfort between you and the other person. And this is going to facilitate a much more natural and confident conversation. All right, next, don't put people on the spot or ask them uncomfortable questions. Now, sometimes you might be really genuinely interested and you ask someone a very personal or a very complicated or difficult question, not because you want to make them uncomfortable, but because you are genuinely curious. However, it is important to just be aware of the tone of your question, the wording of your question and the timing of your question. I think that it is great to have deep conversations. I, in fact, love having deep and personal conversations. It's actually one of my favorite things. So I don't mind if people ask me difficult questions. However, there's always a time and a place. So it is important to just be aware of the situation, the conversation, the person, how well you know them, the topic that you're talking about before asking these difficult questions. So I'm not saying don't ask difficult questions ever or don't ask personal questions ever. Just make sure that it's the right time, the right place. You're not going to make them uncomfortable or offend them. And you are careful with the wording and how you ask, how you go about asking this question. All right. So I can maybe make another lesson on how to ask difficult or personal questions. Let me know if you're interested in that. Tell me in the comments down below, and maybe I can make a lesson on that topic for you. Okay. The next thing is to listen actively. Now, active listening means that you are listening, paying attention, and thinking about the things that you hear. It's not just that it's kind of in one ear and out the other. You're listening and you're really paying attention. Sometimes in a conversation, we don't listen actively. We listen in order to respond, okay? So we listen and we basically are thinking about the next thing we're gonna say or the next story we wanna tell or the next question we wanna ask. However, this doesn't make for a great conversation, all right? And again, we're talking about how to improve your conversations. So listening actively means you're listening, you're paying attention, you're making mental note of things that you want to ask questions about later. So you're not listening just to respond. You're not listening and thinking, okay, this is the next thing I'm going to say. You're listening to understand rather than to respond. So listen actively. Okay, next, focus on your message rather than your mistakes. I know that it doesn't feel good to make mistakes when you're speaking. It doesn't make you feel confident. Nobody likes making mistakes. I don't like making mistakes, of course, but I make them. We're all human. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't make you any less intelligent. It's no negative reflection of you if you make a few mistakes here and there, all right? I make tons of mistakes when I'm filming. I've made a million mistakes just recording this lesson for you, but it doesn't matter. I just stop, pause, regroup, refocus, and I refocus on my message, all right? So always focus on your message instead of your mistakes. Even if you forget a word or you make a mistake with grammar or you don't know how to pronounce something or you forgot what you were gonna say, don't let that discourage you from continuing the conversation. Don't let that stop you, because a lot of times I have seen people make some mistakes, or maybe the other person or the listener doesn't understand them and they get so discouraged. They're like, sorry, my English is not good, or sorry, never mind, or forget about it. And they just basically give up and don't even try to finish making their point or to continue the conversation, all right? However, it's important for you to understand that your listener is not assessing your English. They are not judging every single mistake that you make. Instead, they are most likely trying to understand what you're talking about, right? They're trying to understand the story you're telling or the point you're trying to make. So it's okay if you make a few mistakes here and there. What matters is that your message is clear. And if you learn to shift your focus and kind of change your mindset and look at it this way, I promise it will help you. And just a side note, if you do make mistakes, don't keep apologizing for your English and saying, oh, my English is not good. I'm sorry, my English is not good. I'm sorry for my bad English. Don't do this. Just take a moment, pause, calm yourself down, regroup, and keep going. All right, next, learn some transitional phrases that you can easily insert into pretty much any conversation. Now, these are phrases that you can use to change the topic, to express your opinion, to react, to mention a new point, and so on. So some examples of these phrases might be, speaking of blah, 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 or that reminds me, or by the way, I wanted to tell you about, or going back to what you said earlier, or I've been meaning to ask you. Now, these are just a few examples of the many, many phrases that you can use in conversations to transition from one topic to another, to respond, and so on and so on. I have created a free ebook to teach you specifically how to have natural and fluent conversations in English. And in the ebook, I do give a lot of these phrases as well. So it's absolutely free. You can get your copy by clicking the link down below this lesson. Okay, and the next thing is to expand your vocabulary bank. Of course, if you have limited vocabulary, limited general English vocabulary, your ability to participate and engage in conversations is going to be limited. So you do need a certain level of vocabulary. This being said, you do not need to know every single word in English. You do not need to learn every single complicated word or every single complicated phrase that you come across and try to use it. Instead, I would recommend learning common words and phrases that you can use to talk about lots of different topics. So versatile, common, everyday vocabulary. You can also learn synonyms for words that you use all the time. So for example, instead of saying, that's important, it's very important all the time. Important is a very common and important word, but it would be a good idea to learn some synonyms or some alternatives. So for example, instead of important, you could use vital, crucial, essential, necessary, and so on and so on. All right. So learning synonyms is a fantastic way to improve your vocabulary bank. You can also learn commonly used idioms and phrasal verbs that you hear other people using often, or that you read, or that you see or come across all the time. Now, again, I want to stress you do not need to know every single word in English. Nobody knows every single word in English, not even native English speakers, not even native English teachers. And that is because it is not necessary. So your approach to vocabulary should be learning words that are useful for you in reality in your life. So it doesn't mean that learning more is better. Okay. So with vocabulary, I always say that you should focus on quality over quantity. So the actual words that you are choosing to learn, to practice, and to study need to be relevant and useful to you and to your life. Because if you don't use them, of course, you will not remember them. Now, if you are trying to level up your English vocabulary skills and your vocabulary range, make sure you check out the weekly English Words membership. This is an amazing monthly membership that myself and teacher Tiffany created, designed specifically to help you with your English vocabulary and your listening skills. And you can check out the weekly English Words membership by clicking the link below this lesson. So these are my 10 tips for more confident, more natural, deeper, just better conversations in English. And I want to remind you that when it comes to better communication skills, better conversation skills, you have to think about so much more than just your grammar, your vocabulary, and your pronunciation. There are lots of different elements that go together to create a successful communicator or to contribute to a successful conversation. So hopefully this lesson has helped you to think about those different parts of a conversation and hopefully identify some of the areas that you might need to work on, or some of the areas that you may have never thought about before. So if you have any other tips that have helped you improve your English conversations or your communication skills, as always, do share those with us down below in the comments. And if you have any questions for me on this topic, do leave those down below as well. Thank you so much for watching, for learning, and spending time with me today. And I'll see you very soon in the next one.